podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey everybody, you're tuned in to the podcast of OA, episode number 164. I'm your co-host Myron Rumsey, and as always, I am joined by our good friend Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how is life?
Hey man, life is good. Little Clark is starting to come into his own, so he's a sweetheart. I'll tell you what, he's a good time having around, and this break has given us an opportunity to spend so much time with him. It's been a blessing. It's great. Love it.
That's great. So yeah. We finally have a new issue of Green Lantern to talk about after almost 2 months.
God, hasn't been that long, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy. So we've got that in this episode, and we have another installment of our fan favorite You Are the Core segments. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff to go over tonight. And we're talking to a friend of ours, a friend of everybody's, I guess, Donnie. I came across him in a tweet, and I reached out and said, "Hey man, we'd love to have you on the show." So it's going to be good to hear from him tonight, hear from another member of the Corps.
Yeah, he has an account on Twitter that he does. It's Green Lantern centric. And he does little mini reviews and stuff. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to him. Not a whole lot of DC news, although they did just announce, they just rescheduled all of the books from May, obviously giving them new dates in June. And everything is there for the most part, although there's a couple of Green Lantern-related re-releases that are not scheduled for June with the books that got moved, and that was the Green Lantern 76 facsimile edition and the Green Lantern $29 comic.
I wonder why they took those off.
Yeah, I'm assuming just they're trying to keep it to the newer books. I also see that the Green Lantern 80th anniversary hardcover has been pushed to July.
Interesting. Well, it's funny if you look at all the previews that are coming out, all the solicits. I mean, everything is so Knights metal and Batman centric and Superman oriented that, I mean, there's barely any kind of registry when it comes to Green Lantern stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to see how things pan out as this continues to unfold around us. We'll see. But, in June, supposedly things are going to start getting closer to normal. So we'll see. The other cool thing was that one of the members of our Facebook group found a Green Lantern Hershey bar at a Speedway, kind of like one of those gas station grocery store combinations. Saw something there and posted a picture of it, and it looks like there's a series of DC Comics superhero Hershey bars. There's a Batman and a Flash and a Wonder Woman have been sighted in the wild as well, and it sounds like there's definitely a Superman one as well, but they're numbered up to 7, so we don't know what the other missing ones are yet. Nobody has found them.
Simon Baz.
And then the last of the DC animated movie universe as we know it, the last one of those movies has come out. It's out digitally only right now. I think it's out scheduled for a few weeks from now. It'll be out on physical copy, but it's Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. I don't know whether you had a chance to see it yet or not.
Oh yeah, I watched it. It was good. I mean, I was a big fan of Red Sun, and I know Red Sun doesn't really fall in line with their story, with their story arc that's happening with this whole Flashpoint and Apocalypse War. But this one was really, really good. It had a lot of different characterizations that were, I don't want to give anything away, that were really, really neat and creative. And it had the lanterns in there. But I will say this: it's kind of sad what happens to the lanterns. Yeah,
I don't want to give anything away. I think we'll talk about it maybe more in depth when the physical version of it comes out. Myself, I'll be honest, I didn't like it. Not so much the overall story, but I didn't like it when looking through it from a Green Lantern perspective. I'll leave it at that.
That makes sense. And I don't want to give anything away, but there was one point I didn't like it, that I thought that doesn't make sense why this would be the end of the DC animated universe as we know it. And then I can't give it away because it's going to be, But anyway, I see what you're saying about that. I try to look at it from not a Green Lantern perspective, because I knew they weren't going to be heavily focused on the lanterns. And by looking at it through that lens, I enjoyed it a lot more, but that was just me. And the animation was awesome.
I had a hard time sitting there watching a few things happen and not letting it get to me.
Yeah,
but when I think about the story itself, it was okay. But yeah, I don't want to get into it either, because I don't want to spoil it for somebody who hasn't seen it yet. So we'll hold the conversation, but I think after it comes out on physical media, I think we should talk about it a little more in depth.
Yeah, that'd be a good time. I mean, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
How cryptically can we talk about something without not talking about it, right?
Right. Well, if it's cryptic enough, go out and watch it. I mean, it's worth the watch at least. I mean, if you're into the DC animated universe, which I've always been into, I've always thought they excelled at it. All of them have been great. I mean, I like them all. Flashpoint, and this one, Red Sun. I love that. I thought that was phenomenal. Wonder Woman Bloodlines, they've all been really, really good for me. So, and this one was cool. It was definitely really cool to see what takes place.
I've enjoyed them all for the most part. There's been some hits and some misses, but for the most part, they've been good.
Yeah.
And for those that are thinking about buying it digitally, shop around, because from what I'm understanding, depending upon where you buy it from digitally, you get the bonus. There's some bonus material. And I guess there's a short for Adam Strange, which I bought mine on Amazon Prime and got none of that stuff.
Oh, that stinks. I didn't get any of that stuff when I got mine either.
So I'm not sure exactly where you get the bonus goodies, but apparently someplace you can get the bonus stuff.
I always do that. No.
But anyway, we've got some good stuff to talk about in this episode. So why don't we pause, get a drink of soda or whatever beverage will wet your whistle, and come back, and we'll start talking about either some comics or we'll have an interview.
All right, sounds good.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, Lantern fans, welcome back, and welcome to your weekly installment of the Green Lantern Fun Fact. And keeping with the Kyle Rayner theme, I'm going to go ahead and throw this one out there for you. Kyle Rayner's tenure as Green Lantern got off to a decidedly polarizing start. Following the events of Emerald Twilight, Kyle was given the last Green Lantern ring, with no training or mentors to help him navigate this new responsibility. His only real ally on the outset was his girlfriend, Alex DeWitt. Alex helped Kyle to understand how to tap into his willpower and find the self-confidence to believe he was capable of being a hero. And then she gets stuffed into a refrigerator. Z-list villain Major Force strangles Alex to death and leaves her crumpled body in the fridge for a horrified Kyle to find. It was one of the most egregious instances of violent killing of a female love interest for the sake of sensationalism and adding to the hero's pathos. Future DC writer Gail Simone coined the term women in refrigerators as a catch-all for the misogynistic trope, and it's become a lightning rod among not only the comic book community, but in the broader world of fiction as well. And there you have it, another weekly installment of the Fun Fact. It wasn't very fun, but at least it's relevant, and it's informative.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of OA.
The podcast of OA.
And welcome back to the podcast of OA. So, Phil, we have a new comic book to talk about, which we haven't had in quite a while. And, some people may not have been able to read the book because of what's going on in the COVID crisis and not being able to get physical copies, but the book was available digitally. Interesting issue, another one and done, another Earthbound adventure. What were your thoughts about this issue?
Well, at first observance, I had to remember back to what Liam said about this one was going to be a different set of artwork, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit because, I mean, if I had to pick a preference, I liked his other artwork from the other issues. This one was a little bit. I like his other stuff better. I'll just say it like that. I think he said something about this one was going to be digital.
Yeah, I think he did the coloring in this issue. I think he did digital colors, and it's the way I would describe it is it's very painterly.
Yeah, I mean that'd be the best. That'd be the best trope for it. I agree. It took me a little while to get used to. I had to start rereading it a couple different times because I was like, man, that art's throwing me off. I'm so used to seeing Liam's vivid artwork and stuff, but I mean, this one was good. It just wasn't to my liking.
It was odd too because it wasn't consistent throughout the issue. So, there were panels that were very painterly, done in that painted style. And then it kind of went to the normal style for some panels. Then it would jump back again, but I couldn't find a logical reason as to why it was changing.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. That one where Al's standing on after he crashes that quantum ship or whatever it is. Yeah,
the teleportation ship, the X-300.
Yeah.
It reminded me a little bit back during the Jeff Johns run. There was a 3-issue arc about the Star Sapphires, and it was done by a Spanish artist named Daniel Acuna. And it was that same kind of this was a more pastel-y, watercolor-y kind of style, but it was that painted style, and it looked okay for that 3-issue arc on its own. But then when you put it in a collected edition, it was almost jarring in a way because it was such a change.
Yeah, and you're right. I'm starting to notice more about how it goes back and forth to that different style of artwork.
The one thing I really liked was that there was a panel where you could see the cloud creature, and the lightning was coming out of what looked like eyes. He did this almost this hole, like there were holes for eyes and a mouth, and the mouth was very sad, and it looked like it was crying. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that was cool looking. I mean, the art is, it is nice. It kind of reminds me of like an artwork you'd see for Flash Gordon.
Yeah, kind of. It fits in with some of the experimental styles we've seen. But I think, like you said, it's a little jarring. I think if I had seen the painting type style for anything that involved the cloud creatures and then traditional artwork for the other things, that maybe it would have made it look like, you're in this other dimension. It looked different. That would have been kind of cool, I think.
That one panel towards the end where Hal's floating, and then it shows Hal's face outside of that, whatever that silhouette is. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and even those two look completely different,
Yeah. It was kind of a neat issue, too, to see Hal come back to Earth in terms of being in his familiar surroundings and reuniting with Cowgirl and seeing Herkstone and Shane Sellers, Rocket Man. It was neat to see those elements back again and to see him, behind the stick of an airplane. That was cool. The one thing that got me, and the Orintho babies were cute as all get out. And I love the spot where Hal's named them like Lucky, Plucky, Chucky, Bucky, and Tops. Yeah. That was pretty, reminding me of Eddie a little bit. From back in the day. But the one thing that really kind of made it difficult for me in this issue, not to be overly critical, but Hal and Cowgirl are off in the other dimension, and Cowgirl kind of hints that, well, it sounds like somebody's sad, and then they escape, and the next thing you know, Hal already knows what's going on. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? It just seemed to come so out of the blue. And I actually thought, well, maybe did I flip through the pages so quickly that I skipped something? And I had to go back and look like, no, I didn't miss anything. How did Hal go from not really knowing anything about this to suddenly knowing exactly what was going on? And to me, that was, you're leaving too much for the reader to fill in the blanks. I understand that the Morrison's take on this is that we're trying to see Hal through the eyes of other people. And that's why there's no thought balloon. So we don't know what's going on behind Hal's eyes, but I just didn't see any clues to tip the reader in as to what was going on. And then so when Hal comes up with it, it just seems so unorganic.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. And you made that mention before about there's no thought balloon. So you're basically left with questioning what Hal's motives are and what his thought processes may be. And we're so used to seeing that with this character because, thought balloons are cool. I've always thought they were, ironically enough, I've always thought they were a good addition to telling a character's story.
Yeah, it's just interesting and odd to see it that way. And maybe, when this run is over, maybe we'll look at it a little bit differently. And the other thing is that the story doesn't really connect to the overarching reason why Hal's on Earth. This almost seems like, well, there's something going on and we're going to give Hal all these one-off adventures that don't really matter in the overall plot. But then when you get to the epilogue, then there's all these revelations about, well, now we know that the murderer of the Green Lantern is one of the members of the Superwatch.
Yeah, that's going to be cool to see them again.
Yeah, and we see more members of the Superwatch.
And that ship looks awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. The characters that were there at the end, some of them come from previous history. So Lady Q has the logo on her belt and her chest of a character that, again, we're talking 1968 Superboy number 144. So it's one of those one-shot, a character that appeared in one book in DC Comics history that nobody really is going to remember, but Grant Morrison remembers. But there were these three characters that were called the Hyper Family, and they were from a planet that exploded, and like Kal-El, they escaped in a rocket ship, and they landed on a planet that had a red sun, and the red sun gave them powers. And their son was called Kirk Quentin was his name. He went by the name of Hyperboy, and he had Superman type powers, Superboy type powers. So that's the Hyperboy they're talking about there. And I think Lady Q is his mother because the last name of Hyperboy, his alter ego is Quentin, which would be Lady Q. And her logo and on her belt and her chest match the Hyper Family logos.
That's interesting, man. You really did your research into that one. I would not have got that at all.
Well, and then the guy that's talking to her she calls him Power Lord. And the only reference I could find to Power Lord was there was a toy line in the 1980s from Revell called the Power Lords. And it was a set of figures where the torso flipped around and the main character, Adam Power, had a gem in the middle of his forehead. And it looks very similar to the gem in the forehead of this character that's talking to Lady Q. An odd choice if that's what it is. And I could be completely wrong. And Princess Illustra, I tried. I could find nothing about Princess Illustra.
Well, it's funny because the Power Lord figure, he's blue. This guy's blue too.
Right. So I thought it was an odd choice because it was a licensed property, and somebody else, some other company has the licensing to these figures. The Four Horsemen released new versions of these figures not that long ago. So I thought it was odd.
Didn't DC Comics have a Power Lords comic book a long time ago?
Yep. It was a 3-issue miniseries that tied into this toy line.
Huh.
And go ahead.
That's really interesting. No, I was going to say that's really interesting. I wonder if they still hold the licensing to these characters.
I don't know. Back then they were called the Power Lords with a space in between Power and Lords. And this guy's just Power Lord. So I don't know whether he's doing a riff on it or what the deal is, but I thought it was an interesting potential reference. Don't know if that's really true what it is, but we'll find out obviously as the issues go by.
Yeah, but it's cool to conjecture,
Yeah. I love to speculate. To me, that's part of the fun. You get more for your money if you're speculating in the days and weeks in between your issues. I'm excited though about the Flash book next month.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what Liam's going to do with the Flash costume. He ought to make it look pretty cool.
Yeah, I hope it's going to be fun. I love a Barry Allen, Hal Jordan team up. That to me is one of my favorites in all of comics. So I'm really looking forward to it.
You don't read Flash comics, do you?
I have not read them in a while.
Man, I'll tell you what, man. Joshua Williamson's doing he just does fantastic work with the whole Flash mythos. I mean, he's built that whole time stream. Oh, he's just built the whole thing. Speed Force. It's gotten really good, and I really look forward to reading every issue that has a Flash in it. It's good stuff.
It's cool. On Twitter, recently somebody posted a thing saying, name your Trinity that's not Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And for me, it's Hal, Ollie, and Barry. So, we got Hal and Ollie last season, air quote season, and we're gonna get Hal and Barry this season. So I'm excited.
Yeah, good choice.
All right, my friend. Well, we will take another pause, and then we're going to have a conversation with our guest for the You Are the Core segment.
All right, that'd be cool. Looking forward to that one.
To tell you the story of Green Lantern is to tell you the story of the birth of a universe, the origins of DC as a whole.
It's a magic emerald meteor from space in the 1940s.
It's the establishment of the JSA.
It's the birth of the Silver Age.
It's the introduction of a universal police force.
It's the formation of the JLA.
It's the emergence of the multiverse.
It's a crisis in both space and time.
It's an emerald dawn.
And it's an emerald twilight.
It's the brightest day.
And the blackest night.
And the Lantern cast covers all of this and everything in between. We're Green Lantern's greatest advocates and fiercest critics. We've been fans for years, and it's the reason we're self-proclaimed Lanternologists.
So find us on iTunes and Stitcher and give us a listen, because the history of Green Lantern really is the history of the DC Universe. And we've got the interviews, commentaries, reviews, and more to back it up.
Welcome back to our You Are the Core segment. And this week, Phil and I are joined by our online friend, Donnie Underwood. Donnie, welcome to the podcast of OA.
Sir, Myron, Phil, this is such an honor. I have listened to your show for a number of years, and I love podcasts, and this is one of my favorite podcasts. And when you guys contacted me, I was just overwhelmed, and I'm so glad to be here.
Well, good. We're happy to have you, Donnie.
So, Donnie, you do some stuff on Twitter, and I want you to give everybody your Twitter handle so they can subscribe to you and follow you. Plus, you also do a podcast. So, I'd like you to share that information so that people can find it and find your content.
Yes, on Twitter, I'm known as the Emerald Enthusiast, and I do Green Lantern product reviews. It's almost exclusively Green Lantern and comic-related content that I post there. And I'm also part of the DC Tales from the DC Multiverse podcast network, where I host a new podcast that is Green Lantern based called the Emerald Echo. We only have one episode up now, but episode 2 and 3 are getting edited as we speak.
Very cool. So I'm going to find links to both of those, and I will put them in the show links for this episode, so that if anybody's out there is trying to find your content, and rather than searching, they can click on the Blog of OA article, and they'll get the links right to your stuff.
Outstanding.
So how long have you been a Green Lantern fan, and what got you interested in Green Lantern in the first place?
Well, I was born in 1973. And my first exposure to comics came through Super Friends, and born out of that was a need to get any comics related to the characters that I saw on that show. And of course, one of them was Green Lantern, of course, Hal Jordan, and I immediately went out, and it wasn't very easy to access comics back in the late 70s. There wasn't internet. I lived in a small area, so basically all I had were places like 7-Eleven, and I had an uncle who owned a store, and you'd go in and you'd see these magical racks of comics, and I never have lost that the feeling that I get when I see those comics put up on a rack like that. But from that point on, any characters that I saw on Super Friends, I wanted to know more about them. And really the second part of this answer was, when I went to college in the early 90s, that's when the first time that I lived in several cities, and I finally had access to comic book stores, because I didn't have that when I was younger. And in the early 90s, of course, when all these big controversial events were happening, I was working, I had money, I had access to comic book stores, and so that really kind of recharged my my love of Green Lantern. And of course, that's when Emerald Twilight happened. So yeah, that was a point to where things really took off, and that's when Green Lantern became my go-to comic.
Nice. So, what era of the Green Lantern comics interests you the most?
Well, I will say when I went to college and I was finally able to, I had never seen trade paperbacks before. I think the first trade paperback I ever saw was like 1988, was a Death in the Family. And when I finally started to see trade paperbacks collecting the old Green Lantern stories, I wanted to know all about the mythos. But of course, this was during Volume 3, and Kyle, from that point on, became my absolute favorite DC character. But it also helped me gain more respect for the development of both Hal and John and Alan over the years. I really liked how Volume 3 handled all of those characters. And despite the controversy, surrounding all that, the stars just kind of aligned for me there, because I was a fan of that. I was a fan of, the Broken Bat and the Death of Superman, and which at the time, again, it was divisive among fans. Some people loved it, some people hated it. But for me, it really ignited my imagination. And Emerald Twilight is something that I regularly read. And so that was just, that was a time that I have very fond memories of.
So does Green Lantern have any particular or special meaning for you?
Well, I will say this. Kyle's journey, that was a time that, I was getting ready to go out into the world. And I'm also someone who's always, kind of been creative. I like to draw and do other things along those lines. And so Kyle's character really resonated with me, because unlike John and Hal, who were kind of natural heroes, Kyle really had to learn and take that journey. And of course, we know that, Ron Mars and Darryl Banks drew on the journey of Peter Parker from Marvel. And so when I read that volume, there was a lot that was very familiar there. And, again, reading those stories even now, 26 years later, I can still recall how much I connected with the character back then.
Well, it's funny because we were just, Myron and I were just on our Kyle Rayner kick here recently.
I know the stars aligned one more time, because I was like, this is a perfect time for me to be on the show. They're going to talk about Kyle, and that's wonderful. So,
I mean,
go ahead, sir.
I honestly think this is the most that we've talked about Kyle Rayner, if I'm not mistaken. What do you think, Myron?
Yeah, I would say so. Because primarily when we started the show, and it was Bill didn't really have any familiarity with Green Lantern at all. And we were jumping in straight into the John's stuff. So we really didn't go back and look at the old things. But now that things have changed and we don't have as many new books to talk about, it just was natural to kind of look backwards. And you can't look backwards at Green Lantern history and not at least look at that era. You can't.
Right.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, that's still, permeating a lot of Green Lantern stories today. Parallax is still mentioned. Obviously, what has been done with Sinestro, all of these things they're still there, even if they're not continuing those stories per se.
Very true. Very true. So I know you've got quite a collection of stuff, because you've posted a lot of it on Twitter, and you sent me some pictures of your collection. Do you have a favorite item or issue that was maybe your favorite thing?
Well, this will have to be a two-part answer, because as far as the most, I guess, eye-catching thing I have the Sideshow Collectibles life-size bust of Hal Jordan. And when people come into my nerd cave here that I'm currently in, that's the first thing they kind of gravitate to, is they're like, whoa, look at that bust. And I think there were only like 300 of those produced worldwide, and it was not cheap. I got it in an after Christmas sale, and but I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous.
Is that
go ahead.
Is that the one that you see on Big Bang Theory in that comic book shop? I don't know if you watched.
That's the one. Yes.
Oh, that one's awesome.
You have no idea. It is gorgeous. I really wish Sideshow would do the other titular lanterns in that scale, but of course there haven't been any plans to do that. So,
Yeah, that statue's on eBay right now for $675.
Yeah, and that's that's the low end. I mean, I've seen it go for more than that. And like I said, I think they only produced 300 of those. They produced Batman and Superman too, but in greater numbers.
Of course.
Yeah.
we like to rag on Batman every now and then.
Oh, of course. Oh, it's easy to take shots at old Spooky. You know, you love him, but at the same time, it's easy, just like all the Lanterns have over the years, to kind of have fun with Batman.
Right. It's just a natural thing.
Yeah. But the other part of that answer, that there's two things that I have that they're more sentimental value than anything, is I have a Kyle Rayner retro figure, based off the old Migos, which I'm sure you probably played with as a kid, Myron.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. And it's in the package still, and I got it signed by both Ron Mars and Daryl Banks.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. It's funny. The day that I met Daryl Banks, it's just etched in my memory forever. I'll never forget being at a Comic-Con and having seen his name for so many years, and I rounded this corner and there he was. And I just remember all of a sudden, my mouth goes dry, my knees get weak, I feel myself start to, sweat a little bit down my back. And of course, that's fanboy sweat. That's a whole different level,
That's right.
And so there he is. Yeah. And so I go over to his table, and of course my hands are shaking, which he thinks is hilarious, and my kids think are hilarious. And I'm like, hey, let me try to get my stuff together here, okay, everyone? But so they signed that for me, and then later on I got Daryl to do a commission, which is a crossover I would love to see, which is Black Panther wearing a Green Lantern ring.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes. Oh, I absolutely love that. And of course, that's on my Twitter page. I did a review of that, and Daryl's art is breathtaking.
He's one of those guys that doesn't get his due.
No, he doesn't. You're right.
You know what's, yeah, definitely not. And his art is just, it's so outstanding, but it was funny because issue 55 of volume 3, there are 3 straight panels where they're obviously based on professional wrestling moves. It's Major Force and Kyle fighting one another. And there's an elbow drop, there's a double arm overhead choke, and then a big Hulk Hogan boot. And I was like, I believe this guy's a wrestling fan. And that's one of the first questions I asked him. I was like, are you a wrestling fan? Because this looks like you use professional wrestling here as your inspiration for this fight. And he was like, oh yeah. He was like, when I worked at DC, he said, we used to go, to Madison Square Garden all the time, a bunch of the writers and the artists, and we'd have a good time at professional wrestling events. And I was like, okay, it wasn't just me. I was correct. So.
And back in those days, man, that was when wrestling was cool. I mean, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy. They had some great wrestlers back in those times. And I remember vividly, I talk about to this day about growing up to that era of wrestling. The whole transition from regional to, being on the main market with cable coming along. It was definitely, it was an interesting era, that's for sure.
Yes, well, in that era too, that was just prior to what they refer to as the Monday Night Wars. Now, the early '90s were kind of ramping up with WCW and the WWF, and Daryl talks about I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he talks about wrestling from around the world. So he really is a devoted, longtime fan.
Very cool.
I had a similar interaction with Marv Wolfman and Joe Staton. There's an issue of Green Lantern in Volume 2. It was issue 133 where Hal is blind and he's in the Arctic and he doesn't have his ring and he's got to deal with all this stuff. He goes snow blind and all this stuff. And it was an issue that was seminal for me in that I've talked about it on the show in the past where Hal Jordan's character has helped me get through some really close near-death type experiences. And that issue in particular was one that I always drew upon. And that was a Joe Staton, Marv Wolfman collaboration. It was the first Marv Wolfman issue in his run. And I got to meet them both a couple of years ago. And I had a similar thing where I started shaking and I got all emotional. I actually started to cry in front of Marv Wolfman and I felt awful. But when I told him the story, he got kind of teary-eyed too, because I was like, dude, you helped me get through so many things. And I went up to Joe Staton and again started to shake his stuff, and I showed him the issue. He goes, this is the issue where Hal punches the polar bear, isn't it? And I go, yeah, it is. And we started telling the story, and it was the same thing. But it's funny the connections you have with the character and the creators behind them.
I'm the same way with Dan Jurgens. When I started reading Superman before he died back in the 95 issue, I started reading Superman well before that. And Dan Jurgens he was talked about a lot in DC. And then, of course, that issue came out with Superman dying and stuff. And that was a pivotal point for me as a fan. I remember it vividly. You're right. And I haven't got to meet Dan Jurgens face to face still to this day.
He's a cool guy.
Well, I certainly hope that happens for you.
Yeah, I'd like to. He was on the show that one time, Myron, but I don't think I was on that. I think you had to interview him for something. I couldn't be on that one.
Yeah, they had me interview him when he took over the Green Lanterns book. DC contacted me and they were trying to promote his run on the book, and they contacted me. And then it was funny. I ran into him a couple years later and he remembered the conversation. And so it was really cool. It's funny when you talk to somebody and you haven't met them and then you end up meeting them, you kind of have the instant connection even though you've never actually met the person.
Yeah.
You mentioned Joe Staton there, Myron. I was at the Baltimore Comic-Con last year, and there was just a plethora of Green Lantern creators there, and somehow I missed Joe Staton's name in this big list of guests that were there. And so I'm just kind of walking through these, these aisles or whatever, and I make this turn, and all of a sudden there's Joe Staton. And again, it wasn't quite the same reaction with Darryl Banks because I was surprised, but I was like, Oh my goodness. And so, I got this great print that I got him to sign, but it was like all of a sudden there's Green Lantern royalty. It's Joe Staton, so that was an interesting experience.
I think the coolest interaction I've ever had with a creator was Ethan Van Sciver, and we won't get into what's happened with him since he's left DC and all the controversy and all that stuff. But back about 6 years ago, I turned 50, and I had never bought an original piece of artwork, and I wanted a Green Lantern sketch from an original creator, an original commission, and my wife let me buy one. And so I contacted Ethan Van Sciver and said, hey, he was going to be at a convention in my hometown, which I live in a very small area. So for someone of his caliber to come to our area was really kind of bizarre and unheard of. And so I had him do a commission for me, and he came to the show, and we ran his panel and recorded it. Bill and I did. It was the anniversary of I think it was the 10-year anniversary or so of Green Lantern Rebirth. And so we were talking about that. We did all that stuff and so on. And he gave me my commission, and it was really cool. And, we went on our merry way. Well, I was in Baltimore Comic-Con, same show, different year. And he was there. And I wasn't going to go up and bother him because I'd already interviewed him and stuff. And I was going to get a book signed by him and stuff. But anyway, he sees me. So you figure it's been probably 2 or 3 years since I met the guy. He sees me in the middle of and you know how busy Baltimore Comic-Con is. He sees me on a Saturday at Baltimore Comic-Con and hollers my name across the room and has me go over and sit down with him. And he starts chit-chatting with me like he knows me.
Wow.
And it was the coolest thing. And think what you will about him. And, I can't speak to that. All my interactions with him have been nothing but positive and great. So I'm not going to jump down that trench, but to have a creator remember who you were and remember you on site. We spent maybe an hour at a convention doing a panel, and that was it. But it was just an amazing thing to have somebody be like that. It's cool.
Yeah, I have a couple books autographed by him, and including some Rebirth stuff. And yeah, he's set aside some of the weird things that he's said since leaving DC. You can admire someone's talent whether you agree with their sort of philosophies in life. And those are treasured parts of my collection too. So.
This little convention he did here in my hometown, he did free sketches for everybody that came in the line. He sat there the entire day doing free sketches and interacting with everybody that came up, and he didn't charge a penny for any of it.
Wow.
That's really cool.
Really. But it's funny you mentioned that. This past Baltimore Comic-Con, again, one of the people who was there was Daryl Banks, and I remember coming down this set of steps and looking, and there he was, and he saw me, and he raises his hand, and he was like, "Hey, Donnie." And if you've ever seen Jingle All the Way, that part where Turbo Man points at Jamie in the parade, and Jamie's like, "He knows my name." That's exactly how I felt about at that moment. I was like, I've made it in life.
It's exactly what it feels like. It's an awesome thing.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, exactly. So I know exactly how you must have felt that day, Myron.
Now, if you, hey Donnie, so do you read your Green Lantern books digitally, or do you prefer to have hard copies from your local comic book shop?
When it comes to Green Lantern, my process has always been to support my local comic shop by buying the physical books there. And what I like to do is buy them and read them once, and then later on get the trade paperbacks or the hardcovers, so I don't have to keep reading those and getting oils from my hands on those, so I can keep those nice and preserve them, and I can just read my trades. But when it comes to digital comics, I like those too, because my appetite for comics always exceeds my wallet. So currently I'm using the DC streaming service, and they have a huge library of comics there. I think I looked last month, I read 300 comics on the DC Universe streaming service. So when it comes to Green Lantern, I like the hard copies, but I like to read as much as I can when it comes to really any comics.
Right. Yeah, the digital ones are cool. I use a pretty cool app on my iPad. It's called Comic Zeal, and it puts all your comic books in order, and you can put them in. You can put it in individual cases, and you have all the Green Lantern in one box and all your Supermans in another, and then you can put sub boxes in there for different storylines or whatnot. It's kind of cool how you can organize it. And I've been using that app for well over 10 years now. But I still like to go to my local comic book shop and buy usually back issues and stuff, or random things that I like to find. And the shop I have here in town, Apotheosis, they're amazing. They've been doing a delivery service throughout this pandemic, and they deliver their comics, and my wife gets to order beer from them because they serve beer there at their shop. And I can't speak highly enough of them guys. They went above and beyond to give the fans what they want, especially when their shop has been closed.
Yes, you really have to feel for many comic shops, because you've got to think that they're kind of operating on a month-to-month basis, and that their profit margins probably aren't great. And I'm sure that a lot of them were very hard hit. But the one here in town in Harrisonburg, it's called the Secret Lair. They've been doing curbside and trying to take care of their fans as much as possible. So, I have admiration for all the comic book shops out there in the country that, are trying to survive during this pandemic. You definitely have my support.
Yep, exactly.
Very true. Very true. I hope everybody comes out of it as unscathed as possible, really, because I'd hate to see more shops close.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to see this be the death of them.
So,
yeah.
One more question, Donnie. If you look at the entire history of all the books you've read from Green Lantern, what would you say is your favorite story or arc?
Well, of course I would have to say, Kyle's, Emerald Twilight and A New Dawn. I really like the original concept of parallax. What Ron Mars did with Hal Jordan, and even though I really don't mind the parallax being the entity that infected him, I love the Jeff Johns run. By the way, I think it's been 20 years since there's been a Green Lantern story that I haven't liked. But A New Dawn, watching Kyle take that ring for the first time, and of course he was very kind of self-centered and just having a good time. But when Alex DeWitt was killed, having that Uncle Ben moment that Ron Mars has talked about, that is something that's just forever etched in my mind. And after that, having Kyle interact with Alan and John and try to carry the banner for the Green Lantern Corps when he wasn't, again, a natural hero, that's something that is just when you read a story like that, it ignites your imagination, and from that point on, and we all have that one story that we've read that you're going to be a lifelong fan as soon as you read that story, and that's how Kyle's early issues were for me.
Awesome. All right, well, we appreciate you being part of our You Are the Core segments and being on the show. We really appreciate you being on.
Well, I appreciate you guys even more. Like I said, I love this show, and you guys are outstanding. You guys are really part of the Green Lantern mythos now. You guys and the Lantern cast, your stuff is going to live on forever. And when people say Green Lantern, you guys are connected with this mythos now.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you for saying that. I don't know if that's true or not, but we'll see.
it definitely is true. It most certainly is. So.
Cool.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
All right, welcome back, Lantern fans, and that's episode 164. Digitally filed. What'd you think, Myron?
Oh, it was a good time. That conversation with Donnie was a lot of fun. If you guys are on Twitter and you're not following Donnie, you really should. He does some really cool stuff, and he's always there to promote Green Lantern stuff. And his short videos are really cool. Gives you in a nutshell everything you need to know about some of these different products that are out there versus sitting through a 10, 15-minute video on YouTube. Just a great guy. And I hope we can get on his show. It'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be a good time. And it's kind of funny just coming across him by happen chance. Like you said, he was always a follower on the Facebook page or whatnot. But it was nice to get somebody else on here, another Green Lantern fan, just to give their version of how the character feels for them and the resonance they have by reading the books and stuff. And, Donnie's no different than any other Green Lantern fan we talk to. There's always an emotional pull to the character, and Donnie represents that in the fandom.
Yep. Yeah. I love this segment just because we're finding different people that are out there and getting to hear their experiences and how are they similar to our own? How are they different from our own? What draws them to the mythology? And I think that's just really cool. I mean, it's hard to get sometimes creator interviews, but sometimes I think the fan interviews are even better than interviewing a creator. Yeah,
I agree. And I'm Donnie, just so you know, when you do listen to this, I'm supremely jealous of your Sideshow collectible Green Lantern Hal Jordan bust. I may be inclined to come steal it.
Yeah, that's one I don't have that I wish I had.
I've seen that I don't know how many times on that Big Bang Theory, because I used to watch that all the time, and I saw it in the background, and I kept telling my wife, I'm like, "There's that bust that I really want. Oh my God, I want that so bad." Man, that's expensive.
There's another one, not too much different. It's a 1/2 scale that's done by a sculpture artist by the name of Jordu Shell, who I adore his work. He usually works with more in the horror genre, and he did a Hal Jordan bust for DC Direct, and it's got a cloth costume on the top, on the shoulders and stuff with a logo on it. And I've been eyeing that one because it's a little bit more affordable. But then my wife keeps saying, "Well, you don't have room to put it anywhere." And I'm like, "Well, I could take something else and box it up because I can't put my entire collection out. I have to rotate things in and out because I've run out of room." And so I was like, "Well, I can rotate it in and out." And she goes, "Oh no, we're not doing that." So I have to find a way to like, well, hey, I got a great offer on this bust. I couldn't turn it down. It was too much of a deal. I had a coupon.
This one's going to be a little tough to swing by my wife. Hey, look, wife, this is something I want. It's $675. No big deal.
well, see, I can get the half-size bust for about $300. So, I can play with that a little bit. I think we'll find out.
Right.
But everybody will be back in a week or so, and this episode will be going up a little bit later because we were working around Donnie's work schedule. So rather than be earlier in the week, this one's going to be probably a Saturday episode release. But then we'll be back to record again next week, and I'm not sure what we're going to talk about yet. other than having another Green Lantern fan on, but we'll find something, I'm sure.
Well, I think I did mention, and I'm going to kick myself for even saying I mentioned it. I thought I was going to do the Simon Baz origin story.
I was going to let you off the hook, man.
But I want to stay dedicated to our fandom out there, and I know there's a certain amount of Baz fans that are out there, or Baz, or however you want to pronounce it. And I'm willing to appease to their nature, and in this time of global pandemic, I'm willing to swallow the sword, and I'll take one for the team, and I'll read his origin story. I'll do that one next week.
Okay, you heard it here. It's official. Next week, we're going to do the origin of Simon Baz.
There's a small caveat to that. You can't fault me for some of the ridicule that's going to come with it. It's just my opinion. It doesn't mean I don't like you. It just means I may not like the character in the book, and expect some criticism of the character. But I will be fair. I'll say that.
We're going to be able to hear your eyes roll.
Yeah.
All righty, everybody. Well, until next time, treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.